In this video, I'm going to be making a instant dehydrated meal in a jar. I made one of these videos a few months ago making some really good chicken and rice soup, and I'm going to do something similar this time, but instead of soup, I'm going to make chili. Now, the only thing that I'll have to add to this when I want to prepare it is water and, in my case, meat. Now, I could use some freeze-dried meat. I was thinking about opening up my number 10 can of Mountain House beef crumbles, but I don't need that much of it, and I don't want to kind of blow the whole can just to get that little bit out of it. So I'll end up using some of the frozen ground beef or maybe ground turkey that's in my freezer. But the first thing I have to do is some dehydrating. I have most of the ingredients that I need already dried, except for a couple. I need to dehydrate some poblano pepper, some green chilies, and some corn. So that's the first step. This first segment of the video is going to be pretty short as I get the stuff in the dehydrator, and then I have to let the dehydrator run for pretty much the entire day, and then we'll pick it up from there. So it's pretty straightforward. I'm just going to chop this thing up and then spread it out on the dehydrator. I'll probably kind of go fast forward on this part so you don't have to sit here watching me chop up this pepper. Okay, now all I have to do, as always, is spread these out on the dehydrator sheet. I don't need to dehydrate a whole lot, so this machine's not going to be super filled up, which hopefully will mean that this goes a little quicker than usual. So there's one sheet. On the next sheet, I'm going to do my corn. I've got this straining in a colander right now, and this is just from a can. I could have used frozen, but I happen to have a spare can of corn laying around that I didn't mind using for this. Okay, and then lastly, we have our green chilies. Now this is from 2 of the small cans of green chilies, and I've had them kind of soaking on this paper towel for a while, but they're still quite wet. These are going to take a little while to dehydrate, I'm sure. And I'm also a little worried that they're going to drip a bunch, so I might put some paper towel in the bottom of the dehydrator too. Because these are so mushy, they're not going to spread out probably as much as I'd like, but we'll do our best. They'll dehydrate all the same. Okay. I'm going to wash my hands and then put these trays into the machine. I'm just going to put a couple of these paper towels in the bottom here. I've never really done this before, but sometimes stuff drips a little bit as it's drying, and I just love to not have this thing full of chili juice. And also, because they might drip, I'm going to put this rack closest to the bottom. Since I don't need to load this thing all the way up, I'm going to spread these out a ways just to get better air circulation. And that should also help it go faster. So that's it. I'm going to close this thing up and, of course, put it in the basement because the sound of it upsets the dog. And we'll come back in about a day. Alright, I let this dehydrator run for about 12 hours. And everything seems good and dehydrated. So my next step is to take these vegetables out and get them onto a plate. The way I like to get stuff off of these dehydrator trays is to kind of pour it into a bowl first, just so I can sort of contain it in case the stuff wants to go springing all over the place as it pops off of this mesh. from there, I'll just transfer it onto a paper plate for the time being. There's the corn. Here is the poblano peppers. Okay, and finally the green chilies. These were pretty wet when I put them in, so they might be stuck a bit to this mesh. We'll just kind of work the mesh around and get all these off of there. Needless to say, the volume of anything that I dehydrate is a lot smaller when it's done than when I put it in there. That's our green chilies. Alright, next I'm going to get the rest of the ingredients together and we'll go from there. A lot of ingredients set up and ready to go here. Now, I don't need to put most of this stuff into the jar in any particular order, so I'll start with my onion. Now, this is onion that I've previously dehydrated, and you know, if I'm making chili from scratch with fresh ingredients, I would mix the onions in as the meat is browning, but since this is a instant meal, we have to make some compromises. So I'm going to add about 1/4 cup dehydrated onion. That should equate to about an entire yellow onion. Actually, I've got a 1/3 scoop here. That's okay. I like my chili pretty oniony. So that little bit of onion is going to translate pretty much into one decent sized yellow onion. It sure doesn't look like much when it's dehydrated. So I'm making two instant chili meals here. As long as I'm going through all this effort, I might as well make a couple of them. I'll bring one of them camping with me in a couple of weeks, and then the other one I'll just store. Alright, so we got the onion. Next, we're going to add some garlic. And I don't have any garlic that I've personally dehydrated, so I bought some minced dehydrated garlic. And according to the container, it says 1 medium clove would work out to be about a quarter of a teaspoon of this. And I put only about 1 clove of garlic into a standard size batch of chili. So that's what I'm going to do. I'll just put a 1/4 teaspoon in there. Alright, next we might as well put in our vegetables. Now I'm just going to kind of loosely divide this in half and put half in one jar and half in the other. It doesn't have to be exact, I'm just going to sort of eyeball it. Okay, same with the green chilies. Just sort of approximately divide this in half as best we can. That seems good enough. These are all kind of clinging together from the dehydrating process, but once they start stewing in the pot, it'll all break down just the way it should. And then the corn. I know not everyone likes to put corn in their chili, but I enjoy it. So this is 1 can of corn. And it seems like a lot of corn in dehydrated form, but that's okay. I know that this will work out to half a can because I put 1 whole can in the dehydrator yesterday. Alright, we got our vegetables, we got our garlic. Next, I'm going to add some tomato. Now, my chili recipe calls for tomato juice. That's the main liquid in it, is tomato juice. Well, if you want tomato juice in a dehydrated form, you go with tomato powder. I could have made my own, but this whole giant container was about $7, and that's going to get me a lot of tomatoes worth of powder. So I worked it out to be about 6 tablespoons of tomato powder for this standard batch of chili. So I'm not going to get real specific, real precise. I'm just going to do about 6 tablespoons. See, this was a new container and I used probably about maybe a third of it for these 2 batches of chili, so that means I can still do a lot with the rest of that powder. Alright, now tomato juice that you buy from the store pretty much just contains tomato juice and some salt. I don't need to add a lot of salt. I usually get the low sodium tomato juice if it's available anyway, but I'm going to add some because doing it like this is going to start me off with less salt than using a can of tomato juice from the store. So I'm just going to put a few shakes of salt in each one of these. There's also salt added into my seasoning mix, so I don't need to put a lot in there. I'm just trying to recreate about how this would taste with my classic fresh chili recipe. Okay, so except for the beans, the last thing I need to add in here is my seasoning mix. Now I've already pre-mixed this and separated it into 2 different little containers here so I can just dump it in. Use whatever chili seasonings you like. This is my own blend that I like. Again, when you're making it fresh, you add different ingredients in different stages. There's not as much of that here when we're talking about a dehydrated instant meal. Pretty much add just about everything in from the beginning. Okay, so we got the corn, we got tomato powder, salt, poblano, green chilies, dehydrated onion, the garlic, the chili seasonings, and I almost forgot. Sometimes I add a little bit of beef broth into my chili. Well, I'm not gonna add any broth of any sort, but what I do have is some of my broth base beef seasoning. So this stuff's also pretty salty, so I'm not gonna add a whole lot, but we're gonna go with about a tablespoon for each jar. That should be good. The last ingredient is the beans, and I just happen to have a whole lot of red kidney beans. I acquired these already dried in bulk, so I just have tons of them. Now the thing about these is you have to soak dried beans for quite a while before you use them, otherwise they'll just be hard as a rock. So I need to soak these overnight, probably a good 8 hours, separate from the rest of the ingredients. So I need to figure out a way to separate the beans from everything else so I can pull the beans out separately. Now I was thinking about trying to jam a little Ziploc bag in here, what I think I'm going to try is using coffee filter. I've actually got a couple of coffee filters just layered up so it's a little thicker. And these are Bun coffee makers, so they're a little bit taller coffee filters. So I'm just going to see how this works to put that in there. And hopefully when it opens back up inside the jar, it'll create kind of a little dish that I can pour the beans in without them getting mingled into everything else. I haven't tried this before, so we're going to see how it works. I don't want the beans to fall to the sides of it, otherwise I gotta fish them all out. So what I'm hoping is, when I'm ready to use the beans, I can just pour them out and everything else will stay in place, and then I can yank that filter out and discard it. Well, let's just see if this works. Now, my standard sized recipe calls for 1 can worth of beans. And since these beans don't shrink a lot when they're dried, I'm just going to use roughly a can like this. This is the can from the corn that I added yesterday. This is probably going to be a lot of beans now that I'm looking at it. There's liquid, and when you buy beans in a can, so I don't think I want to put a whole jar in there. I think I'm going to go with about 2/3 of a can of the beans. And let's see. I think that worked out pretty good. I think I could pour those right back out when it's time. As long as I don't shake the heck out of this thing in the meantime, I bet that's going to work out pretty good. So let me do the same with the second one. Spread that out. Okay. Then we'll do about 2/3 of a can. Okay. That's pretty good. It's hard to see all these ingredients down here when the seasoning all just sort of filled it in, the seasoning and the tomato powder. You don't really get the full layered effect. Oh, I guess this one's a little better. Oh, I lost a bean. A bean fell down to the side. Well, I was bound to lose at least 1 or 2. So, all I have to do now is seal these up. Because I'm going to be using one of these in a couple weeks, I don't really need to seal it. But since I'm going to seal the other one anyway, I might as well. So I'll get this stuff cleared out of the way and get my vacuum sealer set up, and we'll pick up there. Alright, to dry seal this jar the same way I always do it, all I need is my vacuum sealer and my jar attachment. And I'm going to plug this hose into the accessory port, plug it into the jar attachment, and seat it snugly on the top with the lid in place, and I'm going to hit the vacuum button. And to release the pressure so I can remove the attachment, I have to pull the hose out, and then I can slowly twist and lift the attachment off, and that's it. Perfectly sealed, ready to go. And I like to put the rings on, especially if I'm going to be transporting the jars. Some people always tell me I shouldn't, but I never have a problem with doing so. That's pretty much it. That's the sealed instant chili mix. And I'll pick this video back up in a couple weeks when I'm out in the woods and I want to cook this thing. Okay, well, it's been about 1 second for you, but 2 weeks for me. So here I am in the beautiful Huron National Forest, and I'm going to make me some chili. It's a pretty good day here. Temperature's a comfortable 50 degrees or so. It's been a little gloomy today. Looks like it might be rain, but so far haven't had any drops, so all's good. Now I've had the beans soaking for about 10 hours in this Ziploc bag, and here's the rest of the jar. I'd say the beans poured out of this thing pretty well. There was a few stragglers that got in there, but that's okay. I'm gonna get the cast iron over the fireplace, and we're gonna get started. Well, these coals have mostly burned down. There's a couple of logs still on fire, so I moved those off to the side. These coals are screaming hot, so this is probably gonna brown this beef pretty quick. But I'm gonna start off with my ground sirloin. And as soon as that's browned up, I'll add the other ingredients. Now, because this is so hot, I may end up having to pull the pan off a little bit, just because I don't want it boiling once I put the other ingredients in. But we'll play it by ear. Well, I'm starting to wonder if I should have used the big pot for this. I think once I put the other stuff in, this is going to be really full. But too late now, and we're just going to see what happens. Oh, that is hot. I didn't need hair on my knuckles anyway. I went with sirloin because it's leaner, and I didn't want to have to worry about draining grease out of this before adding the other stuff. So, plus it tastes really good, why not? Alright, that's just about browned up. I'm going to go ahead and put my other ingredients in. I'll go ahead and remove this coffee filter and the couple of beans that's stuck behind. And I'm just going to pour this right on in. had to give that jar a couple of thumps to get all the stuff out of there. Some of it's caked together a bit. I'm hoping that'll break up as we go. Wow, that is hot. I'm going to go ahead and put on my silicone oven mitt here. Alright, now I got to add just about a full quart jar full of water here. This is going to have to cook a little longer than usual because of all these dehydrated ingredients. They need to rehydrate and get nice and soft. So this is going to end up cooking for a little while. And while I'm at it, I'm going to add in my beans. Now I don't need to add all this liquid from the beans, so I'm going to try to drain some of it out. That should be good. Now this is a little wetter than a normal batch of chili because it needs to soak into all those ingredients. And some of it's bound to cook off as well. So I'm going to let this go a little while and stir it periodically, and we'll come back in a few. Okay, it's coming along pretty good. It's been about, I don't know, 20 minutes. I took it off the heat for just a little bit because it was starting to boil a little too much. I had a little sample of it too, and I'd say that it's probably, about 3/4 of the way there as far as the ingredients being good and tender and rehydrated. So I'm going to cook it a little bit longer. I'll probably pull it off the heat again in another minute now that it's starting to boil again. But so far so good. As far as the taste, initial impression of my little sample was that it's pretty good. It's not exactly the same as my fresh recipe, which of course it's not. The flavor of those ingredients changes a little bit when you dehydrate them. I'm picking up more of the green chilies, and they taste a little, I don't know if I'd say bitter or sour compared to when they're in a can. Maybe that's not the flavor that I'm getting. Maybe it's my dehydrated onions. I'd say there's just a little tinge of something to this taste that's not quite the same as my fresh recipe. But as far as an attempt to recreate it, I think I got pretty dang close. So I'm going to cook this a few more and then we'll pick it up. Well, I'm calling this done. I left it on for probably another 20 minutes just for good measure. It's thickened up good, just to about the consistency I like it. And I didn't think to bring a bowl, but I have my handy mug here, so that's going to work just fine. I remembered a ladle of all things, but not a bowl. I'm just happy I remembered a spoon. So that's what we got. I'm going to give this a more thorough taste test, and I gotta say, it looks good and it smells great. It's pretty good. I'm thinking about it more. I think some of the taste difference here is from pretty much the only ingredient that's different from my fresh recipe, and that's the tomato powder. I didn't use tomato juice, but I used tomato powder. I think it might be a little strong. I think maybe I should reduce the amount that I use by, I don't know about as much as half, but maybe use about 2/3 as much. And the peppers in here are strangely more potent than my fresh recipe. I don't like a real spicy chili. I can't really do spicy food in general, but I like a little bit. And for some reason, after dehydrating the poblano, well, it's probably more like the green chilies, the spiciness is increased a little bit, which is interesting. So all in all, I'd call it a success. I might also look into some sort of additive I can put in that would prevent clumping. Maybe even a desiccant pack or two would help. I was surprised to see how much the powders from that clump together in that jar after just 2 weeks. I don't believe there was any moisture in it. The clumps were just sort of packed together. And I know pretty much anything you buy that's powdered, they include additive to prevent the clumping anyway, so there must be something to it. I'll look into that. A couple of veggies that I've bitten into are still just the tiniest bit, I won't say hard, but not completely soft. I think if I make this again, I'll probably get it going way sooner and get some coals and maybe just cook it in the Dutch oven over the coals for much longer. Just sort of slow simmer it, maybe half the day, and get it ready for dinner. But I think it was a good experiment. I'm pretty happy with how it came out. I'd also be interested in trying it again with freeze-dried meat. If I ever break into my mountain house number 10 can of either the ground beef or the chopped up beef, I'll have to throw some of it into another instant chili in a jar. So that's it. I'm gonna finish the rest of my mug here, and I gotta start cleaning things up. Thanks for watching. Till next time, this is Great Lakes Prepping.